a swimming pool high lifeguard thing, and the winner gets Elizabeth. And
you know that fierce WWE wrestler who totally embarrassed himself with a weird storyline, but still ended up winning? Yep, that was none other than George the Animal Steele. He went from being a wild monster in the ring to acting like a child obsessed with Miss Elizabeth, even behaving like a literal animal. It was awkward and tough to watch, but somehow he made it work and still won over the fans. So let's rewind and talk about one of the strangest turns in WWE history. When Steele, one of the most feared and wild wrestlers of his time, suddenly became, well, something completely different. Back in the mid-1980s, Steele was no stranger to chaos. He was the kind of heel who sent chills down fans' spines. Unpredictable, animalistic, and downright scary. That was his thing. People didn't know what he was going to do next, and that's what made him so memorable in the ring. But then, the WWF decided to flip the script. Out of nowhere, Steele was tossed into a storyline involving Macho Man Randy Savage and the ever-graceful Miss Elizabeth. But instead of bringing that wild, dangerous energy fans were used to, Steele was reimagined as this soft, childlike character. Someone who didn't talk much, seemed emotionally innocent, and developed a sweet crush on Elizabeth. It was as if this vicious beast had turned into a big, lovesick teddy bear. Now sure, the storyline got attention. It became one of those weirdly unforgettable parts of wrestling history. Campy, over the top, and oddly charming in its own way. Some fans even loved it for how off the wall it was, but not everyone was on board. A lot of wrestling purists and longtime Steele fans saw it as a step down, even a joke. To them, it felt like a mockery of the terrifying persona Steele had worked so hard to build. Even Steele himself wasn't totally sure how to feel about it. Years later, in his book Animal, George Steele's life story, he opened up about that character change. "I was turning into something of a cartoon character, and I knew it," he wrote. "But that's what Vince wanted. I went from being scary to being a guy who ate turnbuckles and had a crush on Miss Elizabeth." Well, this just goes to show one thing. No matter how strange or difficult the situation, Steele always found a way to come out on top like a true champ. No matter what kind of role he was given, he made the best of it. And that kind of determination was there right from the start of his career. So let's take a closer look at how it all began. Before he was the Animal, before the green tongue, the torn-up turnbuckles, and the wild stares, George Steele was just Jim Myers, a regular guy from Michigan. He wasn't dreaming of wrestling fame. In fact, he was a teacher and a coach, working hard to build a solid life. But like many during that time, he needed a little more cash to make ends meet. That's what led him to take a curious step into the world of professional wrestling. And from there, things got wild. Now, Myers didn't want his students or fellow teachers to know he was wrestling on the side, so when he first started performing in Detroit's local wrestling scene, he wore a mask and called himself the Student. The name worked well, and it kept his real identity under wraps. His manager, Gary Hart, even played along with the gimmick, telling announcers that the Student was more about brute strength than skill, because of course, students still had a lot to learn. It was smart, and it gave Myers a little breathing room to balance his two lives. But it didn't take long for his raw power and unusual character to get noticed. Word traveled, and soon enough, he was scouted by none other than Bruno Sammartino, the face of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation at the time. Sammartino saw something in him. He liked the wild, untamed presence Myers brought into the ring. He knew there was potential. So in 1967, Myers packed his bags and started working in Pittsburgh, where he appeared on the popular studio wrestling TV show. That's when things really started to shift. Sammartino asked him to drop the mask and the Student name. He needed a new identity, something that would stick. Here's where it gets funny. His ring name, George Steele, came from a real coach he met during a junior varsity high school match. According to the story, Myers approached the coach, told him about his new wrestling gig, and asked if he could borrow his name. The coach had no problem with it. Others say a local Pittsburgh wrestler, Jumpin' John DeFazio, suggested the name Jim Steele since Pittsburgh was the Steel City. Myers didn't like the first name, so he chose George instead. Either way, the name George Steele was born. Once the character of George Steele was fully formed, he was invited for a full run in the WWWF. At first, to make the act more believable, he told people he was the nephew of Ray Steele, a famous wrestler. He even claimed to have a deep amateur background and showed off his skills with arm locks and a powerful finishing move called the flying hammerlock, where he'd lift his opponent off the mat by a twisted arm. It was brutal and it looked legit. The wild part? Even though he was playing this unhinged animal-like character in the ring, George Steele would casually tell interviewers he was actually a school teacher in real life. That contrast between his in-ring madness and his real-world intelligence made fans even more curious. Who was this guy, really? Steele's early run included some big moments. He wrestled Bruno Sammartino to a 1-hour draw at Madison Square Garden, which was a huge deal at the time. He got one of the rare clean wins over Victor Rivera at a packed outdoor show in Fenway Park. That win set him up for a longer feud with Sammartino in Boston, a storyline that helped establish Steele as a top villain in the eyes of fans. He also had feuds with stars like Chief Jay Strongbow and Edouard Carpentier. But after a while, Steele felt the need to freshen things up. So he took a break, and when he came back, he was different. Gone was the slightly wild wrestler with a real moveset. In his place was The Animal, a full-blown lunatic in the ring. He tore apart turnbuckles with his teeth, threw the stuffing at his opponents, and stuck out a green tongue. His head was bald, but his back was covered in thick hair. The way he moved, hunched over, with wild eyes and unpredictable behavior, it all made fans, and even broadcasters, wonder if he really was some kind of missing link. The weird part? Steele could talk. In fact, he was great on the mic. He had sharp promo skills and was proud of them. But one day during a WWF TV taping in the early 80s, he was cutting a promo when Vince McMahon cut him off. Vince told him that his character was The Animal, and he was making too much sense. That didn't sit well with Steele, who prided himself on his ability to talk. So when they did a second take, he went in the complete opposite direction. He started mumbling, saying nothing but strange sounds like duh, da. It was his way of being sarcastic, figuring Vince would let him go back to talking normally. But to his surprise, Vince loved it. "That's exactly what I want," he said. And from that moment on, those weird noises became Steele's trademark interview style. He leaned fully into the gimmick of a wild, confused, yet oddly lovable animal. And it worked. By the mid-80s, George Steele wasn't just a heel anymore. He was one of the most recognizable and beloved names in the business. The turning point came during the very first episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. In a 6-man tag match, Steele's partners, the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, abandoned him mid-match. Left alone, Steele lost the match, but something shifted. After the match, Captain Lou Albano came out to comfort him, signaling a face turn. Suddenly, the Animal was a good guy. Then came the storyline that fans still talk about today, his feud with Macho Man Randy Savage. It started after Steele developed an on-screen crush on Miss Elizabeth. Meant to be a short storyline, it took off thanks to Steele's goofy charm. Savage, however, was genuinely jealous. Elizabeth was his real-life girlfriend. Steele tried to ease the tension, joking, "I've got a daughter older than her," but it didn't help. By 1988, Steele added another strange piece to his character. He began carrying around a little stuffed animal named Mine, which he treated like a pet or best friend. It fit perfectly with the odd, childlike part of his persona. Around the same time, he entered the WrestleMania 4 Battle Royal, but never actually got in the ring. Turns out he had a knee injury from a house show before the event. Later that year, Steele's time in the ring came to an end. He was diagnosed with Crohn's disease and had to retire. But he wasn't gone from wrestling. He stayed on as a road agent for the WWF, helping behind the scenes. He was let go in 1990 due to budget cuts, but soon rehired and worked backstage until the late 90s. Steele never won a WWF championship, but it didn't matter. He had become one of the most loved and unique characters in wrestling history, and in 1995, he was rightfully inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. But his story didn't end there. In 1997, Steele made a small comeback on the independent wrestling scene. On Monday Night Raw that December, he even teamed up with Taka Michinoku in a tag match, though they lost by disqualification. The following year, during the Wild Attitude Era, Steele returned as part of the bizarre group known as the Oddities. He stayed with them until 1999. One of his final major appearances came in October 1999 at the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view, where he lost to Greg Valentine. In early 2000, he popped up again, this time on WCW Monday Nitro, facing Jeff Jarrett as part of a Three Legends match. And finally, in 2001, George Steele wrestled his last match. He beat Angel Armoni at an indie show in Wisconsin. Even after that, Steele still found ways to pop up in wrestling. In 2008, he appeared as a groomsman at TNA's Slammiversary during Jay Lethal and SoCal Val's wedding segment. And in 2010, fans got one last surprise when he showed up on Monday Night Raw during a match between Kofi Kingston and David Otunga. Sadly, on February 16, 2017, Myers passed away at the age of 79 due to kidney failure while in hospice care. Before his passing, Myers had his share of health struggles both in and out of the ring. Diagnosed with dyslexia at an early age, he faced challenges that most never saw. Yet despite this, he found a way to thrive, first as a teacher and then as a wrestling icon. But it wasn't just dyslexia that shaped his life. In 1988, he was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, an inflammatory bowel disease with no cure, which would go on to be a major part of his life. The disease caused him years of pain, but his strength and determination never wavered. In 1998, there was a small victory. Myers was told that his Crohn's disease had gone into remission, and for the first time in years, he could live without the harsh symptoms. To make sure it stayed that way, he underwent surgery in 2002 to have his colon removed. It was a big step, but it was meant to keep the disease at bay. Unfortunately, his health continued to decline, and in the end, kidney failure took its toll. That's a wrap for today's video. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you soon.